So you have the lawyers, you have the data, you have the information, but are you setting it up smart? Are you putting time and emphasis on infrastructure? Because the biggest issue that we have with profitability is people not being able to find or locate knowledge, and it slows them down. So, the fact that we still have associates at 3 o'clock in the morning trying to find precedents, is absurd in today's environment.
My name's Tom Baldwin. This is Overruled by Data, the podcast for law firms looking to start their data journey or accelerate the journey they're already on. Brought to you by Integrata. Today, I'm joined by Jeannine Zito, someone I've had the pleasure of working with at Cadwalader. Jeannine brings a really interesting background. She comes from the banking world, worked at JP Morgan, and at law firms, she's worked on the BD and marketing side. She's worked on the knowledge management side. She's been assigned some pretty hefty tasks to do tactically and did them amazingly and thought big picture and strategically. So, Jeannine, thanks so much for joining us today. We're really excited to sit down and chat with you a little bit about data. Jeannine, maybe before we get started, maybe just give everyone a little bit of background on who you are and how you got to be at Cleary.
It's been really a fascinating journey, I would say, in my career, not realizing how much it's been focused on data, but it essentially has in that look back. And I really started my career in investment banking and working through many roles at a large firm that really covered the business side of the investment bank and the M&A business. And I did all sorts of work associated with market and competitor intelligence, managing our pipeline, our revenue, profitability, forecasting, trying to think about ways to market and build our book of business there. And that really started with automating our pitch work and finding those opportunities for client growth through, press relations and conferences and all of the classic things that you would have from a business development perspective. And I did that for quite some time and was really like the center resource for a lot of the bankers and for the business. So I was always touching data and really realized that that was the core center of building any sort of business. And I had an opportunity through some changes at JP Morgan to spend some time at a law firm and really get to know their business development business and how they were managing growth opportunities. And I was honestly floored at how much information they were actually tracking and using to really understand their client base, to do that evaluation as to what the market needed. And I realized I was actually doing a business development, a knowledge management, a business conflicts role at the bank, but there really just wasn't that name for it, right? We just basically supported the business. So it was really my entree into law firms at that time is the next phase of my career, moving from banking to law. And really was finding the same problems that lawyers just don't have time to understand the information that is scattered across the firm. So how can we spare them for that piece? And how can we get them to just be in front of their clients more often and find those opportunities to feed them with the information that they need to make decisions to build their book of business? So at the last firm I was at, where I had the pleasure of working with you, Tom, and where we first met, was really focused on the business development and marketing role and also our growth plans. And I had an opportunity to come to Cleary to focus on the technology behind the resources that was needed and the information that was needed. And that was really exciting for me because what we were trying to do through my entire career was how do we simplify looking at data, getting data in front of people and being able to analyze it. And I have been here for a number of years doing that work.
A number of years, indeed. Yeah, it's interesting, right? So as you mentioned, we got a chance to work together at Cadwalader, and we got to do a lot of really interesting things. And when I got to the firm, I had no idea that there was someone like you sitting there in BD, waiting in the wings to do awesomeness.
In the office next door, just knock on the wall. That's really what it was.
Yeah, and I'm sure your personal journey and understanding data started before then, but at least the part that I am aware of is when we got to work together, we had a pretty big portfolio of things we were expected to do in a very short window of time. And 9 months, we had to roll out a new intranet. We had to put in enterprise search. We had to put in a firm directory. Looking back on that, or maybe during that time, was there something that was like not an epiphany, but where you figured, okay, here's an opportunity. Like, next time I do this, I'm going to do something different, or something where you realize, like, wow, there's got to be a better way to do some of this because this was really hard. We did it in 9 months. We won a lot of awards, which is great, but it wasn't easy.
It wasn't, but I think that's where the epiphany happened, right? Because like I said, in my career, I've been working with data so much and like having tons of paper on my desk and a ridiculous amount of Excel spreadsheets and third-party data that we were trying to find. And then also like understanding from bankers what knowledge they had and how to collect that and utilize that for any planning. So I think through that 9-month journey of not sleeping and doing really good work and bringing things forward was it has to be easier than this. And we have to use systems and we have to break down the data silos to get there. So we had been spending all this time working through it and nothing was really clicking as to like, how can we just bridge these gaps? And really what we kept trying to do was sell the information we were putting on the intranet and sell the information that we were putting in the dashboards and trying to teach people how to use enterprise search, but like adding that context into it as to like, what were they really trying to look for? And what's when it really hit me that like data is just flat and information is just information. You have to be able to tell the story with the data. And that's when it really comes like the intelligent part of what we do. And I realized I was doing that in all of my roles through the history of my career, basically like providing the narratives to bankers for presentations for clients and writing TV interview scripts for what's happening in market trends and getting those recommendations to management for how we can have like business growth opportunities. And later in turn, drawing insights from adoption rates on our legal technology platforms. So it's all about the data, but really the power is what you do with the data. How do you present that in a way that tells you that story? And the way that I always think about it is like having an outline for a novel without knowing where the characters are headed. So real magic kind of happens when you have that data transformation and you take like that static information and you really make it dynamic. And I think that's the point. And during that time period where we started putting systems behind the data and trying to explain to leadership and management and our clients, like, what are we doing with this information? What is the story telling us? That's where I got hooked. And I kind of thought about data being more the intelligence side and the power behind it, and kind of couldn't put the book down after that.
I want to circle back to something, going back to your time at JP Morgan, and then now you spent either equal amount or more amount of time in legal, at least from what I remember. What would you say your time there, what prepared you for working in legal? Where were there similarities and where were there stark differences? If you're coaching someone who maybe is coming into legal for the first time and just trying to get their feet wet.
Yeah, I think what prepared me for legal was banking being a much more sophisticated infrastructure. Obviously, there's a lot of infrastructure in banking, as there should be, because of like SEC regulations and a lot more need for it being a public company, that there were kind of consistencies in the way that we had to deliver information and the way that we were explaining things to management. There had to be standards in your reporting because you had all the different divisions of the investment bank reporting up to, Jamie Dimon. So you needed to have definitions. You needed to have like a data lineage. You needed to have consistency. And in law firms coming over, it was basically like, whichever way the partner wants this report is how it gets displayed. Or the person in finance that's been doing this a really long time knows the information and knows the definitions and knows how it gets, entered into our finance system. So when you're trying to put some structure in place in law firms, it's really trying to think about and utilize that knowledge or that experience from a very structured business and applying it to law firms. And what I love seeing in law firms now is they are really more business focused than they were 10 years ago when I first started joining them. And that's what's really exciting about legal now today.
What would you say was the biggest similarity and the biggest difference between coming from JP Morgan to legal?
It's a professional services world. So essentially, a lot of the clients are the same, and you're just having a lawyer look at it from a different perspective. So the way that lawyers try to get business is very different than, let's say, how banking would try to get business. But the similarities are still in your client relationships and still understanding the market, predicting what could come next, and trying to grow those relationships or sustain those relationships of the key decision makers at your clients to keep getting new business. It's about the same thing.
Was there a defining moment, either before the work at Cadwalader or after, where you realized, wow, data is not just an operational flat tool, but it can be a strategic asset if leveraged the right way?
So I think my epiphany moment was really as we were going through all these different departments and different sets of information that was available at the firm. We were pulling, finance reports, KM or knowledge management side was giving us research and precedents. And then there were specific BD reports that we were looking at as well. And we decided we needed to aggregate that data and just showcase it and make it available to partners. But what was happening was we were building essentially like cookie cutter dashboards that were the same thing that was just an overload of information. And because it was so generic and it didn't really add context to it, partners weren't using it. They just didn't have adoption because they didn't know how to use it and they didn't know how to look at the data. So the lesson learned there is I think is just don't build dashboards to build dashboards because you're just going to confuse people. And that's where I look at it as like that expensive digital wallpaper. You really want to make sure that you're building dashboards that provide data that's going to help with decision making, that's going to lead people to that next step and actually be able to do something with it. Because once you start overloading lawyers or business people with just a tremendous amount of data, they go into a tailspin.
Yeah, one of my favorite quotes is from a partner I was doing work with in my prior life. And she said, I went into the practice of law because I was told there'd be no math. And that always resonates with me when we think about who the target audience is.
Yeah.
So yeah, certainly understanding the why behind data is super important. And I think a lot of folks would share in that sentiment. And if you fast forward now, you start thinking about, you've had really interesting roles where you've been in BD, you've been in knowledge management, you're close to the business, you understand how the business makes money, where the pain points are with partners. You probably spent more time with partners than certainly I have. You get asked to do all the crazy stuff that a lot of people don't get bothered with. Where would you say, like, okay, you're at a firm, you're starting out. What were some of the lessons you learned if you were to go to a firm brand new that didn't have anything with data? What were some lessons you learned that you would advise them on thinking about, like how to see around a corner, not hit a pothole that they may not realize is coming?
I think there's a big cost to waiting too long for perfect. So a lot of firms are really sitting around planning like what is the perfect data strategy and what is the perfect content strategy, while competitors are out there just already getting started, right? They're connecting their systems, they're spotting those patterns. And it's essentially not theoretical because we've all been in these shoes, especially if you've been in the BD world, that, you get those opportunities to pitch last minute and we've lost business or we've lost opportunities because you couldn't pull together that relationship intelligence that existed in all of your systems in a timely manner to be able to present that to a client. So start small and think about what your business pain points are and start with the real problems that you have. And I always say, like, everybody's obsessed with AI today, which totally makes sense. I am too. But we really need to ask, what is slowing down our firm today? And do you have lawyers spending too many hours trying to search for precedents? Like, are your conflict checks really unwieldy? Do you have to fix the way that you're processing invoices because they take forever? There's a lot of opportunity to fix those pieces through data and through information. It can be done through people. It could be done through process. It could be done through procedures, but it can also really be done with data and technology. I'd say the second part of that is leverage what you already have because you do have a lot of data, right? So before you try to think about the right perfect technology solution, organize your data. Think about your document system, your intake systems, your billing platforms, your CRM. Those are all gold mines of data. And the magic happens when you start pulling that together and really thinking about what is the data lineage? What are the definitions behind here? What information can we connect to make our relationships stand out between clients and matters? And it really does then tie into the increased operations and ultimately profitability, because that's what, every firm is focused on. But it doesn't have to be perfect. So if you really start small, then the results will show gradually. You'll get partner buy-in right away if you give them that quick tidbit of insight, when they're standing at your door. And that's then where you can spend more time focused on strategy.
Yeah, a lot of firms seem to get themselves in a bit of a pickle where they don't have the chicken and the egg part sorted out. They feel like they have to have a data strategy before they do anything else. Without the other things, then the data strategy kind of can't really do much with a 300-page PDF, right? There's not a lot.
It's true.
So that juxtaposition of data strategy first or execution, small, quick wins to build momentum. Do you have any examples of things that you could say to a firm like, hey, here's an idea that you don't have to go buy a bunch of tech. Even if you don't have a team of 100 people, you can do this to show value and build momentum for something bigger.
So I agree with you. I think we're overthinking this quick win versus the big strategy concept. There's two sides of the coin, right? There is the need to solve the problems today, and you have to build tomorrow's capabilities at the same time. So my analogy for that is always if you're renovating your house, you still have to live in it at the same time, and you need a place to sleep tonight, but you're also working on that dream kitchen. So you have to be practical about which rooms to tackle first, but it doesn't mean that you're abandoning your vision of this dream house, right? So some of the easy things to start with that don't cost a lot of money or take up a lot of time is building up that data center of excellence. It's getting the right people in the right room to determine what the problems are and what data is needed to actually solve them. And that can't be driven by IT. That has to have a collaborative approach to it. So you need your practice leaders, you need your rock star BD people, you need your KM researchers, or people that could speak to the information that you have, and build up this little committee. It doesn't have to be a strict governance committee, but it's a decision committee that helps you pick the projects that solve real problems, and that can help move you towards the bigger picture as you're doing that. And I also think on that project decision is not thinking about what's the splashiest thing to do based on what everybody's talking about in the market, and we have to hurry up and adopt to Gen AI. We really want to make sure that you're helping your attorneys and you're helping your staff make decisions faster. And so if the project doesn't change the way decisions are getting made, then it's probably not worth doing.
That's a great way to put it. I want to circle back to something you said earlier. Oftentimes, there's this notion that data should be led by IT, and certainly IT as a service provider has to have involvement, but in reality, it's the business that should be driving these strategic decisions. And often one of the biggest challenges is getting everybody at the table where it's what we call big tent projects, right? I need someone from marketing, I need someone from accounting, I need someone from HR, I need someone from finance, and everyone's got to play nice. And that's the other part. Sometimes there's usually somebody always in the room who's got their arms crossed, either literally or mentally. They're walled off from the conversation because they're, for whatever reason, just don't want to get on board. How have you seen in your career, or if you have instances where you've been able to kind of get people over the hump? Because there's always going to be, at every firm, there's always going to be somebody who's going to be an impediment, whether they're obvious about it or not.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people sitting in that room also don't understand why they're there, and they don't understand how to contribute. But they've been selected by somebody for some reason. So I think it's really getting them comfortable with data and understanding their value and why they contribute. And sometimes it's really explaining to them what a win was that already happened and how it got there. And also kind of thinking about the data culture across the firm change, because if you have a firm that understands the importance of data, you'll get people that have that foundational understanding of why they're sitting in that room, because they can lead, they have that strategy, or they've had so many experiences of these wins or failures that they can contribute to. But if you don't have that foundational understanding of a data culture across the firm, it's harder to get there. So you really need to think about getting everybody just from the management committee to your associates to your legal secretaries excited about data. And as I said, like in my career, I didn't realize how much I was focused on data. And it's the same way that people across the firm in every single role, their roles are dependent upon data, right? So it's getting people to think like, we don't need better reports. We need to think about the insights of like, this just saved me 20 hours of client work. That's the stuff that I love to hear when you're walking down the hallways, because it's people that really understand how information played into that part of efficiencies or getting that client, on board for new work. So starting there, if you really have an understanding across the firm as to like what data is and the power behind it, it's easier to get those decision makers in the room or to move the needle on your strategy.
When you say data quality, talk about what you mean by that.
So I would say data quality. And because we keep hearing this about data quality, or the term clean data is being thrown around all over the place. But like, what does that actually mean and to whom? Mm-hmm. Because one mistake I essentially see is treating data quality as like the final checkpoint at the layer that information is being served. So when you're looking at your dashboards, but the real data trust happens at the source. So we have to build it at every single layer. Otherwise, you're just pushing the problem downstream, faster. And it's also about the context of the data. So this data point might be correct in your original source, but the person contributing that information into some sort of system, did they understand what it's meant to be for, how it's supposed to play? Because if people are contributing information in a way that they don't understand the purposes, you're just going to have bad data down the line as it moves through the lineage. Then it goes on the other side, where it's for those people consuming, are they understanding it? Because I hear this all the time. The data is wrong in the system. I don't trust the system. And it's not so much that the data is wrong. Maybe it's not the right information that they need. Or maybe they don't understand the definition behind it. Or to be honest, maybe it is wrong. So to me, data quality isn't really a technical issue. It's more, I think, of a people issue. And that is because our technology is advancing so much faster than our cultures in so many different cases. So if you don't get, like I said earlier, people to understand that data is important and it's just embedded in our day-to-day, you're not going to have anything clean from the source, and people that aren't going to understand how to consume it or use it. So it's just a problem in general.
It's interesting you talk about data cleanliness. It's often that if data strategy is not number one in people's minds as to why they can't do something, they say, oh, our data is not good. What I've observed is that's true and not true, in the sense that every source system has some data that is relied upon for reporting that has to have some level of accuracy, or you wouldn't be pushing out reports from it, because eventually lawyers are going to see it and say this is wrong, and you'll fix it. And so the trick really is say, okay, recognize that not every source system is going to have a perfect amount of data around a lawyer, a client, or a matter that's perfect. But if I can grab elements out of it that are good and leave behind the stuff that's not, then what I'm left with is the best version of data around lawyers, clients, and matters that we have. But oftentimes that's not the mindset. It's like everything has to be perfect in X system. And if there's anything bad in that, then the whole project has to get, kind of like paused until it's perfect. And that's never going to happen, right? So it's strategy or data cleanliness are the two big sort of like blockers we see when firms are nervous about moving forward. So that's a really good observation. So now looking ahead, right? Data and AI are kind of like the cool kids club in our industry. Where do you see sort of the market heading in the next couple of years? What are you excited about, and what concerns do you have?
Oh, there's so much there in that statement, because I'm thrilled and nervous at the same time, but let me tell you why. So the exciting part, and this is kind of where the data nerd comes out in me a lot, is getting really excited in the shift that we're seeing of not just the collecting the data, but actually making the data work for us. And I love the idea that instead of having lawyers or business people dig through all these spreadsheets and dashboards, that we actually could have systems. It's a dream system that essentially would, virtually tap somebody on the shoulder and say hey, here's something you should pay attention to. Or, shifting from that, like, what happened to what should we do? And I think a lot of times, especially in law firms, you have lawyers that are so used to looking back, right? Because the way that they lawyer and provide advice is through precedent. So you always want to look at what happened in the past. And in today's world, to really make change and give something that could be competitive is looking forward. So it's like that, crystal ball mentality versus the rearview mirror. And I think the technology is really setting us up for success to do that. And the technology that I think is really cool to watch and get more incorporated into legal are knowledge graphs. I think they're going to be game changers, and thinking of it as the kind of GPS for legal information. And it's organizing knowledge so our tools can talk to each other. And we are essentially able to retrieve not just like information from documents, but it's the relationship connection that the systems can do between your legal concepts, your cases, and your principles. So that's where I think the fun kind of happens, where everything through knowledge graphs can turn into your actionable firm intelligence instead of just flat data. And it helps you tell the story, like I was saying before.
Just circling back to something you mentioned earlier, for those that are unfamiliar, what's a knowledge graph?
Sure. So let me just take a step back for a second, though, because for knowledge graphs to really work, you have to think about the knowledge and information and the intelligence piece. Knowledge being the practice of law and the business of law coming together. And then for information, your data and your content. So if you take your knowledge and your information, that's when you really form the intelligence piece and having all of those different data sets. What knowledge engineering does is then captures all of that information and data, and it applies technology on top of it, essentially, that turns information into dynamic. And for it to work, to turn the static to dynamic and basically connect that power, you use knowledge graphs. And that is the output of all of the knowledge engineering and kind of that connectors that our coders, focus on. But it's the output of the rich contextual information that you're putting into your system. Knowledge graphs are the GPS for AI and LLMs is how I look at it. They basically steer your AI models into the right direction by organizing and linking the data in all of the meaningful ways. So if you think about it in more of like this sophisticated web where all of your information stored from legal concepts and documents and your principles, and it finds its like place and purpose and transforms all of that data into meaningful insights.
And then the other question I had is, you fast forward a couple years, what's the crystal ball look like for you? Where do you see firms moving towards? Are there any interesting use cases or outcomes that you think today might be a little bit out of reach, a little bit of a stretch, but fast forward 18, 24 months that the industry or individual firms will be better positioned to take on something like?
So I think the actionable firm intelligence piece is really where we're starting to focus, and it becomes that kind of data transformation piece. But there's also the AI element that comes to this. We've talked about like generative business intelligence and like how that connects with your data governance and what your goals are for your information and your business needs. But connecting that with generative AI is really where it can get very cool. So like the innovative part of it is weaving AI into the fabric of how lawyers work. So not just like giving them all of these different solutions or different tools or different separate products that they have to learn, which can become like, the stale products that are basically sitting on the shelf collecting dust. The cool part about organizing the intelligence is making the tech invisible, but the benefits obvious. And you can do that by like having insights pop up right when you're drafting a client email or you're reviewing a contract. And I think the firms that are really going to crush it aren't going to be those that are necessarily just like throwing money at technology, but they're going to be the ones that understand that this whole data thing is fundamental. It's about people, it's about culture, it's about changing how knowledge moves through the organization and gets to the right person at the right time while they're in their workflows that they're already in.
Yeah, that's well put. I love the idea of that contextual sort of like, hey, I'm drafting an email, it pops up. That's awesome.
Technology is there today. The
Yeah.
issue is organizing the data and the information to connect to that as they are going through their workflows.
You brought up a topic earlier, and you talked about the practice of law, juxtaposed against the business of law. I think most people listening to this probably have some understanding of what we mean when we say practice of law. But maybe give some examples of business of law use cases that perhaps someone who's new might not have thought of.
Yeah, so that becomes really understanding who your clients are, what work you're doing for those clients, what relationships you have with the people who sit at those businesses and those companies. What type of work are you getting? What type of work are you not getting and your competitors are getting? Thinking about what are the issues when we try to go through our conflicts and that we're trying to navigate through on making the right business decisions on what work to be forecasting or doing for our clients. There's also this side of like matter profitability. So what are our efficiency programs when we're actually doing work for our clients? Are we doing fixed fees? Are we doing project work? Are we reducing a lot of the reimbursement that we're getting for our research resources that are happening today? What does that profitability look like and what's slowing us down? I think there's also staffing inefficiencies that happen. There's so much data that's out there as to like, do we have the right people staffed on the right projects for the right clients? And I think like these are the data pieces that are important about understanding how to run the business that really tie to profitability.
Yeah, it reminds me of some of the work that Heidi Gartner from Harvard has been talking about for quite some time and putting some legs behind that. I talked to a COO of a firm who was a partner, was in pricing, and now it runs a law firm. And so he's kind of seen it from all three angles. And he made an interesting comment. He said that in some ways, the business of law use cases might have more potential for impact on the bottom line of a law firm than not to discount the mountain of work done on the practice side, but it's a burgeoning area of opportunity for firms to think about.
To add to that point too about the efficiency is it becomes like you have all of the resources and the assets at your firm today. So you have the lawyers, you have the data, you have the information, but are you setting it up smart? Are you putting time and emphasis on infrastructure? Because the biggest issue that we have with profitability is people not being able to find or locate knowledge, and it slows them down. So, the fact that we still have associates at 3:00 in the morning trying to find precedents, is absurd in today's environment. The fact that partners are still calling BD at midnight to get that tidbit for the, 9 a.m. client meeting, we should not be doing that, right? So there's efficiencies that we can put into place today through people, processes, culture, data, technology that really tie to profitability.
When you think about firms positioning themselves, so they've said, hey, cool, this sounds great, I'm ready to jump in. How should firms be positioning themselves to lead this transformation? Are there particular initiatives or mindset you think that will set firms apart?
I think it's setting up this infrastructure, like your data infrastructure, your knowledge infrastructure, having the right strategies and then the right procedures in place to really operationalize your business. There is nothing like throwing, money out the door because you just don't have an efficient operations like any other business. But the importance of that is because you don't want people or firms shouldn't be jumping on the AI bandwagon. That's what I'm worried about just a little bit without having that proper, data foundation first. Because if you don't have the good governance and the infrastructure, it can really lead to problematic outcomes and missed opportunities when you start applying LLMs and generative AI everywhere.
So now we're going to switch gears to how do you encourage action within a data strategy? Now we're talking to firms that are maybe still hesitant, they're not quite sold yet, or they're nervous that they make a mistake and they have a lawyer file that brief that's got a phantom citation to a matter that doesn't exist. All that being said, for firms that are still hesitant, I guess, what lessons or cautionary tales or potholes in the road would you want them to know about so that they have the best chance of success?
I think there's a lot of opportunity with just training and teaching and educating people. And there really doesn't need to be a significant financial cost to that. There might be time and energy that's put to that. But if you educate people on the processes you have in place and why we're asking you to do things, or the purpose of, this field sitting in your DMS system, or, even setting up your intake system to have more instructions around the, details that are being included. When you're trying to downgrade highly sensitive matters to something that could be standard and change the way that the firm has access to information, it becomes less of an administrative burden and more purposeful. And again, this is back to if people have an understanding of data being, part of your culture, they'll get why you're being asked to do this annoying, kind of frustrating, response of email or click of a button type of thing that lawyers don't want to do. There's a lot of value to that, and there really isn't a lot of cost. You need the senior level management buy-in, you need to have it part of your core, and you need the right people to lead and have those conversations, because teaching this is not easy. Breaking down all of those silos are, not easy. It needs some time and attention in order to get you there, but it's something that's absolutely achievable at every firm.
You were saying that, it reminded me of two things. One is shout out to Three Geeks in a Law blog. They had the team on from Mentors earlier in the year, and they gave an entire playbook on their rollout of Copilot. And one of the things that they did is they required, again, talk about low cost, no cost. It was training and time, but they required any lawyer who wanted a license had to go through 7 one-hour training sessions. And those sessions included things like safe use of AI, prompt engineering, amazing topics that set them up for success. And the other thing that I thought of as you were saying this is, I worked at a firm once where a very influential partner was flummoxed when our league table rankings didn't include any of their matters. And I said, well, tell me how you're opening your matters. And they looked at me kind of oddly. And I said, well, there's this little pesky field on that form that I'm sure you're really spending a lot of time on. That field that you have your legal assistant pick is driving what comes out of this report. And that no one, to your point, had ever connected the dots so that this intake form was going to drive our ability to properly represent our work when we're doing any number of our legal rankings. And so until you educate them on the why and how it's being used, tricky. Okay. We still see a lot of firms get stuck, right? And they think they need the perfect data strategy before they do anything. What advice would you give firms starting small, iterating, building a data platform alongside, kind of thinking about this almost in parallel where, yes, I need governance, I need all the things, but if I don't have something to look at the data in, it's going to be hard to kind of effectuate any of those strategic goals I put in place. How would you advise firms that want to kind of work a bit more swiftly and that are stuck?
So I think a lot of it is involving your IT teams, but also not having them drive exactly what the answer to the problem is. They need to have a seat at the table. But it's understanding, again, what the problems are to solve, but what data are you using on a regular basis, or what reports are you putting together on a regular basis that are manual? So if you are spending way too much time, or it becomes really cumbersome to put a client brief together, find opportunities to automate a lot of that. It does not need to be a very heavy lift. It just needs somebody with understanding the information, how to process workflows, where to get the data from. And there's a ton of programs and platforms out there, even something like Power Automate that you can use pretty easily at a low cost to really push through those workflows and bring in those operational efficiencies. Partners are going to notice that. Absolutely.
Yeah, you raise a really good point, right? So you have to have something that's a little visible. Mm-hmm. Like the win can't be, it can be, but it's not as impactful if the win is something that the partners don't get to see and touch. It's a balancing act, right? So how would you approach balancing kind of that immediate tactical, something behind the scenes win versus something that might take a bit of a longer term investment to see the fruits of that labor?
I think a lot of it is about really breaking down your processes. I mean, I can't tell you how many in all of my roles, when you're trying to produce information to go out to a client, or even for your partner to be educated about the call that they need to jump on, or how an associate needs to draft a particular contract. There is so much information that we're losing at the firm because it's just not organized in the right way. So efficiencies come there with just, making a better process or procedures associated with it. But I think it's also, people talk about this like you need partner buy-in all the time, but it actually is right. So by having conversations with those key partners that really can help drive the change or maybe give you the budget or understand the pain points that go into putting this pitch together. A lot of times they just get frustrated that things take too long. But when you break down actually what that looks like and where you can find those efficiencies and explain that to partners, they might understand what you're dealing with all day or why it takes 3 days or a week to give them something at the level of quality that they want and that you also want to put forward with. Understanding the pain points that exist at the firm will really help drive the management committees, your chiefs to really, put some investment behind the strategy or even tools behind it.
That's a wrap for this episode of Overruled by Data. If this podcast resonated with you, if you took one or two things away from it, you want to hear more from law firm leaders that have been there and done that, hit the follow button.